Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening.
Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie, all one word. It just got my weekly bonus episodes. People ask me what I'm watching, what movies I'm watching, what shows I'm watching. I put all that stuff on the Patreon. And we also tend to have, guests from time to time talk about different shows like The Mandalorian, WandaVision, Loki. Right now I'm talking Moon Knight, solo, among other things. But if you want to support us, you can. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons. That's Chris Balga, Jeff Woodman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. That does help new listeners find us. And I have a returning guest. I've got Cody on the show today. Say hi, Cody.
Hello and happy Easter, even though it'll
Happy
be
Easter.
way after Easter, I'm sure, when you drop this. But happy Easter to all the people in the future if you celebrate it.
Yeah, I know. It feels a little. I guess that's why. Is that why you picked this movie that we're about to talk about?
This
Because
is
of Easter?
exactly why I picked this movie, because I had about 4 or 5 other movies I was like rattling in my brain that I wanted to talk about, and I'm like, I don't really want to talk about something religious, but we're probably going to be recording this on Easter. And I was like, I don't know if this is the most appropriate or most inappropriate movie to be talking about on Easter.
I think it depends on who you talk to, I guess.
Exactly. Because I feel like it's, well, just like Mighty Python, it's really good satire. And I think a lot of modern comedy owes a lot to what these guys did in the late 60s and early
Yes.
70s. And not just like Saturday Night Live or anything like that. Like when we were doing our Wes Anderson series on my show, a guest of yours that's been a guest of mine as well, Sarah Ragsdale, pointed out that Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson's dad worked for the PBS affiliate in
That's
Dallas,
right.
Texas,
Yep.
and the Dallas PBS station was one of the first to get the British programming over to America, and like the kind of dry wit, and you have to kind of pay attention and listen to what is being said, and like the humor of Wes Anderson movies has a little bit of that British humor that's in the Python stuff. Like you have to listen to what's being said, because sometimes the the words are funnier than the actual gag themselves.
Agreed. And yeah, you bring up a good point. Monty Python was controversial. I mean, a lot of studios were like, "No, we're just not going to air this stuff. It's too vulgar, it's too controversial, it's too political." But, PBS was like, or NPR or whatever it was called at the time. I'm tripping over my words, but you're right. They were like, "Yeah, we're going to air it." And so that is why we have Monty Python in the US, thanks to public television. I guess we shouldn't tease it anymore then, Cody. Like, well, first off, do you want to introduce the show that you're talking about, that you're referencing?
Oh, yeah. So I have a live show that's usually streamed through YouTube, sometimes on our Facebook page. It's called Video Store Rejects. We're kind of like the Blank Check podcast. We pick a director and we talk about their movies, usually one at a time. Right now, we're doing the films of Ridley Scott and the Coen brothers. And so when we don't
Nice.
have a guest for one of those movies, I have been like doubling them up because they have such massive filmographies, especially Ridley Scott.
Right. Oh my
Like,
gosh, yeah.
like this week, we just, it was such a eye groan for one of these movies, but we just talked his Columbus movie,
Mm.
1492, The Conquest of Paradise. But I doubled it with Kingdom of Heaven, which also historically inaccurate, but it's at least a better made movie, and you're not quite as rolling your eyes. But I guess in 1992, there was still like not everybody knew all the horrible things about Christopher Columbus, or maybe like they just took a middle school history book and was like, oh, we'll just highlight the stuff everyone thinks they know about it instead of like, the real truth. But I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm not a historian, but like watching it, I was just like, wow, they really did they really hurt their backs trying to make this guy look like a good person.
Right, right. That's funny. Yeah, some of those directors like Ridley Scott, he has so many movies that like sometimes I'm watching a movie he directed and I'm like, "Oh, didn't realize he directed this." You know? Like he just has so many different films. But that's not what we're talking about today. You did tease earlier that is Monty Python related. What movie did you choose to talk about today?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't know if it's appropriate or inappropriate, but we're talking their second film, Monty Python and the Life of Brian.
Yes. Okay. So full disclosure, I don't think I've ever seen this all the way through. Like I think I've started it and not really sat down and watched it until last night. So
Oh,
I'm
wow.
coming at this with fresh eyes. Even being a big Monty Python fan, I didn't really watch this one a lot.
Well, I mean, I saw that Holy Grail had been an episode, which makes sense
Yes, that's
because that's such especially here in America, and I think that's partly because it's making fun of like British folklore and everything. But it's such a huge. I don't even know if it's really a cult following because almost everybody I know, I mean, there are some people that don't like it, but like it seems like it's a cultural touchstone for so many people. Like you say a line from that movie and someone will come back and say something to you that relates to that movie.
100%. And I also used to watch the show a lot with my dad. So I've seen quite a few episodes of their show. I saw John Cleese live in person a couple years ago because he accepted an Ernie Kovacs award here in Dallas, and I went to that and got to hear him speak.
Oh,
And
wow.
he's still so funny. Like he was great. Except that the only joke he made that really did not land at all, like there was just silence, is I think the person interviewing him was trying to make conversation, and so they asked him like, "Hey, you having any Mexican? Did you eat any Mexican food while you're here, or Tex-Mex?" And he said that he hated Tex-Mex and that it was gross, and that it was like Mexican food is just food covered in different sauces, and that
Oh,
everyone was silent. And it was like, first of all, that doesn't really describe Mexican food at all, but you could tell, like, he thought it was gonna be, like, a sarcastic, funny thing, and, like, nobody I was like, "Oh, wrong crowd. You're in Texas, they
well,
love Tex-Mex."
he could have, but being British, maybe he doesn't know the difference between like Tex-Mex and like actual Mexican food, because
Yeah.
you could have made a joke because my wife is of Hispanic and Latino, also indigenous, and we make cracks about like Tex-Mex sometimes. Like someone was like, we were at our apartment pool and someone's like, "Well, I work at Jalapeno Tree. Anytime you want Mexican," we're like, "That's not Mexican." And I don't know if you know what Jalapeno Tree is, but it's like a East Texas Tex-Mex chain. Like no one,
Oh, no, I haven't heard of it, but jalapeno tree doesn't sound very authentic. Just the
no.
name alone.
But I mean, you can throw a rock and there's a Tex-Mex place. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there's
I
a
live,
couple.
about a oh, go ahead, sorry.
Uh, I was gonna say there's a few things in here that felt dated, but I mean that's the case, especially with comedies that are at least
Yes.
10 years older. Like you're gonna find things you're like, oh, that's okay,
I
because like
agree. There's a few things that don't age well, but I mean, you have to also keep in mind that I mean, it is kind of shock humor too, right? Like they kind of went
hmm
out of their way to be a little bit shocking. So I think that's going to lend itself to things that may not age well. But I agree. Overall, it was not that bad.
no, I've seen much worse. Like I recently, I think last month, was on a was on a live show talking about we ranked the Judd Apatow movies, and like the good movies, they're still good, but there are clearly things in some of those movies where you're like, oh, that did not age well. Like,
Yeah, Judd Apatow in particular, I feel like doesn't really age well. Like, and even when you compare it to, like, say, Kevin Smith or someone else, for whatever reason, the brand of humor around that time was like especially egregious, even though it was, closer to now. I don't know why.
yeah, I don't know why bro humor was so big like in the early 2000s,
Yeah.
but like yeah, and then you go back and you're like, "Oh, man. Yeah. Oh, we thought this was so funny." And like I'm not saying that the movies aren't funny. I'm just saying like
It's harder to sit through.
we
Yeah.
just kind of ignored all these like homophobic and sexist things because we just thought it was funny and weren't thinking, and now
Yeah,
we're
this
like,
was like the college humor days for sure,
"Mhm."
and like frat house humor. Yeah. But yeah, so this movie, yeah, surprisingly, it's not too bad. And let me go ahead and read the synopsis for anyone that hasn't seen it. I think you can kind of guess what it's about by the title. But a young man, Brian, who was born one stable down, but on the same night as Jesus, becomes intrigued by a young rebel, Judith. To try to impress her, Brian joins the independence movement against the Romans, the People's Front of Judea. However, in an attempt to hide from the Romans, he relays some of the teachings he's heard from Jesus, which ends up spurring a crowd to believe he is the Messiah. While trying to get rid of his followers and reunite with Judith, he embarks on several misadventures. So, this is a loose plot. I would say that the movie is kind of like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it's mainly just a lot of bits kind of strung together. So, it's like, the plot is not important, right? There's just different gags in each scene that are funny. And so
Yeah.
I was telling you that last night, Cody. I was like, I feel like this isn't going to be a super long episode, only because we're not going to be like breaking down the art of cinema. We're going to be talking about our favorite skits, essentially, which is fun to do. So, like, I'm excited. But yeah, go ahead. You were about to say something.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's very much like Holy Grail. There's basically a concept. There is at least an attempt at a story, but you're right. It's mostly just getting from where they need to go and like, well, what kind of crazy, ridiculous gags and skits can we do along the way? But these two films are much more structured than, say, their next film, The Meaning of Life,
Yeah, which I have seen a few times.
which is basically a film version of their their TV show, of their sketch comedy
100%.
show.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with, with this group you can expect, I mean, given the plot I just gave, it's going to be a lot of making fun of like religion, the government, just British stuff. The stuff that British people like to make fun of. And I've got a couple quick facts, just two, because, again, it's not full of like behind the scenes facts or anything. But in an interview section of Monty Python's Flying Circus live in Aspen in 1998, John Cleese said that because of the massive protests against this movie from all denominations of Christianity, he would joke with Michael Palin, "We've brought them all together for the first time in 2,000 years." Which I thought was pretty funny. It's like so true. Like as somebody that grew up very faith based, all the different churches, they don't get along. The Protestants, the Catholics, and even a lot of the different Protestants, at least here in Texas, like don't get along. And so this united them, though. They all agreed that this was blasphemous. So
I,
they had that going for it.
I think
I thought it was funny.
anytime, and I've learned this, I was raised Catholic and living in East Texas most of my adult life, and even living in Kentucky. You get a lot of things that Christians get mad about, and especially anytime it has anything to do with religion. I mean, even when you watch the movie and there's like nothing really in there that like they made like as good of a movie as you could without trying to offend someone, someone's gonna be offended and they're
Hmm.
gonna get in an uproar about it. And I think they're really, you're just giving the movie business most of the time,
Yes.
because people are then gonna be like, "Well, what's all the fuss about? What is, why is everyone so upset about this?" And then also 9 times out of 10, the majority of these people haven't even seen the product. They just know what they heard about it and, like, they're mad.
I'm not gonna lie to you, when you picked this, I actually asked Nick, I was like, "What do you think? Like, is this gonna make people come for me if we talk about this?" And he was like, "It's Monty Python, like, everyone knows what Monty Python is, and I feel like everyone has seen this movie by now." And I'm like, "That's true," and that's, like, their brand, right? Like, a lot of their skits were around, bureaucratic things or strict things, so strict religion, and there's quite a few gags in here about that. And so I was like, "Yeah, I think you're right." I think by now we've moved past the point of being super shocked by stuff, but you're right, there's always gonna be people that, like, everything is a hot take and, like, they do get offended easier than some.
I would say that, and I get why people are upset, because I feel like, because this is basically making fun of organized religion and, like, kind of the craziness people do in the name of religion, or even like how some people are just desperate to find an answer through a person, like.
Right.
But I feel like this movie is, like, personally, like, this one to me is less offensive than, say, I think there's stuff in Meaning of the Life that's a little more, like,
Agreed.
going for the jugular of, like, trying to offend.
Right, right. Like, I do think they have sort of a shock value sense of humor, but I was surprised that a lot of the gags weren't necessarily directed specifically at Christianity. Again, it feels like a lot of their humor is mostly at, I don't know, in some ways just British society and like how rigid it can be, how stiff it can be. And so, like, even though it takes place during Jesus's life, it still feels like it's mostly about British people, if that makes sense. And so I think for people worried that they're going to be offended, I think if they see it, it's like it's not probably not what they're thinking. Um, the other quick fact I had was that this was the very first production from former Beatle George Harrison's new company, Handmade Films.
Oh,
The
wow.
Long Good Friday, Time Bandits,
Oh,
Mona
yeah.
Lisa, With Nail and I, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which I didn't
Huh.
realize he did that, would soon follow among over 30 features.
Oh, wow. I didn't know this was the first one. I knew he produced Time Bandits, and I
I
know
didn't know
because
that. Yeah,
I,
I've never seen Time Bandits still, and
oh,
everyone's like, "How dare you not have seen that?" I
you
know.
gotta
I'm
see it
sorry.
if you love, especially if you're a Python fan, because it does kind of have, it's, I would say, of Terry Gilliam's work, besides the Jabberwocky, which he did in between Holy Grail and this one, it's probably the most Python-esque of his work. Well, and
Okay,
Baron
I need to check it
Munchausen.
out. I feel
B
like Brazil even has some
Oh, Brazil,
Python-esque.
totally, but
Yeah.
it's a much darker
It's
film.
darker, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
which,
right. I really love Brazil, actually. I've, like, finally saw that a couple years ago, and I was like, "I love this. It's so good."
yeah,
Yeah.
I love Terry Gilliam as a filmmaker. I don't think he's made a good movie in a really long time, and I wish, like, he's kind of become like your grandpa who just doesn't need to give his opinion on things anymore. But
Yeah.
like
That
that
happens
work
sometimes.
from up till about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is pretty untouchable in my opinion. Like,
100%.
those chain of films from like Holy Grail to Fear and Loathing is pretty spot on.
I didn't highlight this as, like, a quick fact, but I had read that John Cleese felt like this was, like, their peak. And I kind of agree, like, I feel like a lot of the I'm surprised I hadn't seen this. I mean, and maybe I didn't see it because I was raised so religiously. I don't know. But when I think this was like had some really funny moments, like even funnier than the Holy Grail. I do kind of think this was their peak in sort of writing bits. What are your thoughts on that?
I prefer Holy Grail because
Me too,
the
just overall.
the jokes land better, but I think like as far as like direction and writing and like as people of their craft, I think Cleese is right. This is probably like their best produced thing they've ever done. Like this probably is like the top of their game because like from what I hear about the making of a Holy Grail, they were kind of like had barely a budget, and like the coconut bit I think was just in there because they had done it on in stage and thought it was funny, and they're like, well, we don't have to use horses and spend money on horses.
Yeah, that would be expensive. Hire a trainer and all that. Yeah. Yeah, I just felt like some of the humor in this one was a little bit like even drier, and like you said, you have to listen to what they're saying. Whereas in like Monty Python, I think that one has aged well overall. You know, number one, it's less controversial, but also a lot of the gags are more visual. And so
Hmm.
like, you know, they're funnier, I think, to more people, whereas humor can be kind of it can be niche, you know, not everyone thinks it's funny. And this one, I noticed the humor was a lot about like what they were saying and less about using coconuts and things like that. But
Yeah.
I do prefer Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I don't think anything could replace that. For me, I still think it's funny every time I see it. And yeah, I don't even know why. I guess just it the jokes maybe land a little bit better for me too. So yeah, it's a toss up. But since we're talking about this movie, I mentioned before, I'm like, because I do feel like this movie is predominantly just skit after skit. Let's talk about some of your favorite moments. Or some people would say sketches and say that I'm saying that wrong. But hey, I'm not an improv comedy person, so I don't know. But what are some of your favorite moments in this film?
Okay, well, I think my one of my favorite ones is the prison scene where he gets thrown into prison and you got the Michael Palin character like just hanging upside down,
Yes.
and he's like, "Oh, they must think you're God Almighty spitting in your face." And he's like, "Oh, I would love for them to spit in my face. They just leave me here." And they're like, "Shut up." And he's like, "Sorry." And it's like 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 he's been there so long, I guess they forgot he was there, so he's not even being mistreated anymore. Like
Yeah, and
it's
he's, like,
like
chained to the wall, whereas I guess the other guy has more freedom of movement, but yeah, it's very funny, like, I feel like that's what Monty Python did best, like, these are some of their best, like, their brand that not nobody else did ideas, was, like, this concept of, like, yeah, he's jealous that the new prisoner came in and he's being treated worse,
yeah.
and that's a
And
source of jealousy.
and Michael Palin might be my favorite of the troupe. Like he just the gags they put him in, like it's like he just really brings it home when they give him a character like that. Like, you know.
Yes, yes.
And like they even come back to this like when everyone's being crucified and he's yelling, "Oh, look at you lucky," you know. And
So funny.
and I love the gag of Terry Gilliam and Eric Idle pretending to be like they can't hear or that they're crazy or they can't speak properly, and then when John Cleese leaves they're just like having a regular normal conversation. Like, so what you were saying? Like,
There's so many good moments. I liked when Jesus was preaching, it's the I can't remember the
is it
man,
the
it's been a long time
Sermon
since I've
on
been
the
in church.
Mountain or what?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say. But like when they're like too far away to hear him and they
Yeah.
get into like that argument trying to listen to him, and then the two wives are getting in an argument and then everybody gets in a fight. I thought that part was really funny.
Well, I also love playing off of that because, yeah, that again, Michael Palin and Eric Idle just tit for tat there with the back and forth. But I love like later, like Brian's mom, Terry Jones, who I think predominantly always played women in the Python sketches. Like, or
That felt like that must have really influenced, like, Kids in the Hall a little bit, like
uh-huh.
but go ahead.
But, I love when they're, like, going to the stoning and the guy's
Oh
like, "Do you
my
need a
god, I loved
beard?"
the story.
Like, they already know that all these women are showing up, but they're like, "You're pretending to be" and he's like, "Oh, sorry, sir," even though, she's just has her beard on to pretend to be a man.
Yeah, I thought that scene was funny on so many levels. Like, number 1, they're stoning this guy because he said God's name, which I kind of, like, forget. I think we forget these days, like, how big of a deal that is, like, in the Bible. And so they're gonna stone this guy, um, but as he's like but the prisoner says it again, and then they're gonna stone him again, like, they're, like, getting really amped to stone him, which I felt like was another funny gag, is, like, that the audience is, like, excited to punish this guy, which I think does kind of poke fun a little bit at organized religion and guilt and shaming and stuff. But then, the guy that's, John Cleese, like, accidentally says God's name also, and so then they start stoning him, like, the whole thing was just really funny, and he kept trying to, like, establish the rules, but yeah, like, every rule is being broken, like, they're saying God's name, also, the women are, like, wearing, beards and posing as men, and there's that moment where he goes, "Wait, what did you just say?" And he's, "Oh, I mean, me a man," or whatever they said.
Yeah.
So good. It's like there's so many rules, like the women can't do this, but also you can't say this. And it's like it was just making fun of that, which again, like I think is making fun of religion, but also works really well for British humor because a lot of their humor was around making fun of like bureaucracy and like too many rules. So I don't know. That I think the stoning scene was probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole
Wha
movie.
Well, and I also love where the guy's like he's like, "Quit saying that, you don't know what's the worst that's gonna happen? You're already gonna stone me."
Yeah.
Like, let me just say it and dance a jig, like, you're gonna do your damage.
So funny. Um I liked anytime Terry Jones, who directed this is his
Mhm.
second film to direct, by the way, I don't know if you mentioned that, but, um, when he was the mom, every single time he was the mom, I found those to be very funny scenes, like, also.
Yeah, it's great, and, it's not really funny, especially this day and age, but, like, when she tells Brian he's part Roman, and he's like, "Were you
Oh,
raised?"
yeah, yeah.
And she's like, "Well, at first." It's like,
Yeah,
"Oh."
it's like but, yeah, and yeah, that was a funny scene. For sure.
But, yeah, Terry Jones is great, and I don't know if he gets enough credit because, yeah, he directed all 3 of these films. I know he co-directed with Gilliam on the first one, but I don't know if he gets enough credit and, like, he also helped write The Labyrinth, and
No,
he
I didn't
he
know
did
that.
a few other notable things. I mean, he didn't go on to have, like, the directing career that Gilliam had, but yeah, I don't think he quite gets the credit like some of these other performers get because I guess he's kind of more he usually is playing like a background character or a supporting character in the
Yeah, makes sense if he's directing it.
but
Um, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
speaking of bureaucracy and like British government, I love when the rebellion group and forgive me cuz like they have two that are similar names and that's part of the joke.
Yeah.
But when they're like, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" And they're like, "Well, the aqueduct." Well, yeah, and then they're like, "Well, public water, like it's clean and the roads, education and medicine and so it becomes like this long list of modern at the time like modern advancements and making life easier and they're like, "Well, besides all those things."
Yeah, that was really good. I also liked the haggling scenes.
Mhm.
He's trying to like get out of there really quick and buy that beard. Well, you're not gonna come on. No, no, really do it. No, taggle like you mean it. It's so funny. It comes up like twice when he tries to give that gourd away. Well, what's
Mhm.
wrong with it? That
You
was another
told
scene
me
I
to
really
give me
liked
that
too.
much, but come on now. That's too high. Go a little bit lower. Don't you know how to haggle?
I like that scene where he was I guess re-saying some of the stuff that Jesus had said to a small group, and about um and like every single thing he said they challenged. Well, what were their names? Well, why were they birds? Well, where were they? It's like it's so funny.
Yeah, it's just I just love their back and forth. I mean, like Mighty Python is something I like to put on when I feel kind of like depressed or sad or I need a pick me up. Like, and usually this is not the one I go to, but like what Clee said, this is like probably them at the top of their game as far as like everything coming together and
Yeah.
making like this is probably a better film than the Holy Grail. It's just that we as a Western society like the silly movie where they're making fun of this British legend a little bit better because
Yes.
because we're like, oh yeah, they're making fun of themselves, whereas maybe we don't want to accept either because of our religious background or because it's something a little more serious. It's not as funny to us, even
Yeah,
though
I
they're
think it's a little bit, yeah, when you're making fun of organized religion, I think the stakes are a little higher because it's like still a thing, and it's controversial. Also, there's a lot of nudity in this movie. Like
yes, there is.
funny male nudity.
Yeah.
So I think it just doesn't, like not everyone can watch it, or, you know, yeah.
But I mean, yeah, they have so many gags. And I mean, of course, the most juvenile one is, they have Pontius Pilate with the speech impediment and they're laughing. And then he says, well, I do have a friend named Biggest Dickus. What's so funny about that?
That part got me. I was laughing pretty hard at it. It's so dumb. It's such a silly gag, but it made me laugh pretty hard.
Oh, yeah, and I wonder, like, sometimes when people are laughing, like, are they laughing because that's in the scene they're supposed to laugh, or are they laughing because like they can't keep it together, like,
Yeah, it seemed genuine, like they were laughing pretty hard.
and like I also love the scene where like the old man they go to find Brian and like they're not even really hiding. Because like when they leave, you're like, well, they must have just not cared. And then it's like, oh, well, crucifixion's not so bad. The guy's like, that's a horrible, slow, painful death. Well, at least you get fresh air. It's like,
I
well,
also like that it's at the beginning of the film, but the three wise men, then they come and give those gifts and they accidentally give them to Brian. Like that's how you find out about Brian, like being born the same night. But like to me, the funniest part was at the end when they realize their mistake and they like push the mom, like hit her,
right.
take the stuff, and they go right next door, and there's Mary and Joseph with like their halo and everything. I thought that
I
was pretty
I
funny.
also love the gag about the gifts because, like, when you're growing up, and I don't even know there may be, even as an adult, you're like, I don't know what myrrh is. Like, what
Yes,
is
yeah. And she's like,
that?
maybe don't bring that next time. Like the other two we like, but not the myrrh.
So that
That's
is
funny.
that is one of the bits that definitely has not aged well,
Oh,
and
no kidding. Yeah, it has blackface in it, which is
yeah,
like intense. Like at first you're like, is he? Oh, ooh,
yeah. Like I don't
yeah.
even know why they decided to do that, other
Yeah,
than
unnecessary for the skit. I think because sometimes when people talk about the three wise men, there usually is one of them is black, but
yes,
obviously they could have hired someone black or
uh huh.
just not done that because they're already not Roman or Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
But I mean, yeah, they could have, because I think, yes, one of the wise men, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, if someone knows their Bible and their history of that time period better than I, but I believe the man's name was Balthazar, and he was from a region that they describe as being a darker person. So, but yeah, totally unnecessary for the skit. Like either hire an actor of color or just John Cleese be John Cleese. You don't.
Yeah, like it's already not accurate. So, that it's a weird thing to do, but I think we just forget like how often people did that, and no one, I mean, not no one said anything. People were definitely offended and hurt by it, but in the realm of like Hollywood and I guess the BBC, like they didn't. So they let it go on. But yeah, so that's a good warning for people. I think other than that, the skit is funny, but that is, I understand if that's, too intense.
Yeah, and it threw me off guard because it had been a while since I'd seen this, and I did not remember that in the movie. Like, I didn't remember that part of it. I just remember them, like, going to the wrong manger and then coming back and getting their gifts. Like, I just remember the actual gag, but, like, watching it yesterday and this morning, I was like, "Oh, yeah, not
Yeah, you're like,
cool."
oof. Um, I
And
guess
it
mercifully it's pretty short though.
Yeah. And then I would say the other bit that has not aged well is the whole Eric Idle character wanting to be addressed as Loretta, and John Cleese's kind of run of the whole thing about it is not cool.
Yeah, that felt, and it felt very like they were making their own statement and feeling about it, almost like they
Mhm.
were specifically addressing something they didn't agree with, and that felt weird. Like it wasn't as funny, and it was also like, we just want to make sure it's clear we think this is dumb. It was like, okay, like why are they? Doesn't even really
Yeah.
fit the tone of the movie. So yeah, good point. I think those were the two that stood out to me too.
Yeah, as far as, like,
Yeah,
ooh, like, things that's like, "Oh, yeah, that's not cool."
yeah, 100%. And
Everything
like you
else.
said, unfortunately, if you watch an old movie, especially a comedy, I mean, something like that is definitely going to come up because people talked about the hot issues of the time, and our takes on that have, evolved. So no longer acceptable.
Well, I think the other thing you mentioned is about it being, like, shock comedy, for shock
Yeah.
value. I think that kinda comedy is not really around anymore so much, or,
I
like.
feel like we've recognized that it becomes problematic. It's like, why is everything shocking in air quotes always just something that hurts somebody, like hurts a marginalized community? Like maybe just don't do that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, don't do that, also, I'm glad we've gotten past comedians doing, ethnic voices because that used to be
Yes.
a thing too. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, don't do that, especially if you're a white man. That's just not cool, don't do it. But
Right.
yeah, you can satirize, like, the ridiculousness of society and, like, political climate and all that without, like, just, "Oh, look what I'm doing just to be controversial. Oh, look what I
Exactly.
said."
Yeah, it
And
needs, first of all, it needs to be funny.
yeah.
Like, remember, the main thing is it needs to be funny, and then also, yeah, you don't have to punch down. And I don't think this movie does that a lot, so thankfully, but it does have a couple scenes like you said.
And I mean, almost any Hollywood comedy of this time period we could probably put in and be like, ooh, there'd be something in somewhere in the movie there'd be a scene or something that made us like cringe. And
100%.
that just means we've evolved as a society, and hopefully we continue to do so. So even movies that are being made today in 10, 20 years time, if we go back and watch them, we might go, ooh, not cool.
Yeah.
But I think Mark Maron, and I don't know what people's opinions are of him, but I think he had a very good point, especially around the time Joker came out, which he's actually in. But like he commented on Todd Phillips's justification for making the movie because he was also someone very much a part of that bro frat humor in
Mhm.
the early 2000s. Like he made a comment like you can't make comedies anymore because people get offended and like everyone's got their feelings on their sleeves. And Mark Maron put like, well, if you can't adapt, then you're not funny. Like,
Yeah, and he's right, comedy changes, it evolves. I mean, I think it's probably a genre that evolves very quickly, compared to other genres, and what's funny changes. I mean, have you ever like put in an old movie that's a comedy and you just sat there, and not because it was offensive, but you were just like, this isn't funny to me? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what we think of as funny changes over time,
Right. And I mean, like,
naturally.
comedian Mike Myers, like, his last movie was a disaster, and they're like, "This kind of comedy doesn't work anymore." And he's like, "Well, I guess I'm just gonna," like, he saw that, like, okay, that's my wheelhouse, and if this isn't working anymore, I guess I'll just kind of stop
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
movies because that's what I know how to do. And that's wise too. Like, either stop and be like, okay, my type of humor has, aged out, or evolve. Don't like complain that like woke society has limited your creative flow.
Right. The reality is you've gotten older. You
That
know,
like that's your
when you think of like dad jokes, or like, when you were a kid and your parents would tell you something that was funny or show you something funny and you're like, what the heck? This isn't funny. Things change. Like, that's just reality, and they're going to continue to. And someday I'll probably watch something brand new that everyone thinks is funny and I'll just sit there confused. That's already happened.
well,
So, I mean,
I mean, comedy
that's just how
is
it is.
also maybe the most subjective genre
Yeah, that's
because
true.
there are stuff people think are absolutely hilarious, and I'm like, I don't think that's funny. Like, I'm not a big Adam Sandler guy, and like I know for like god almost 20 years like he was like making a lot of money, and
Yeah.
like most of his humor I don't like.
I'm okay. The biggest, most offensive thing that I don't get, or I was never that into, is that I'm even afraid to say this out loud now. I don't know if I've ever said it on the podcast because so many people are such huge fans, but I was never like a big fan of Kevin Smith's work. Just never was. And I even had friends that would say, "Oh, is it because it's so vulgar and like it's so sexual?" And I was like, "Nope, that's not it. I didn't. I'm sorry." And like, that's something that I don't say a lot because so many people love him, so I don't want to like upset anyone. But it's like it just doesn't work for me. It's not like I'm telling you you can't enjoy it, but like, you know, that's it's subjective. Like you said, like if I don't think it's funny, it's okay. Like it's okay for me to not think something's funny but think something else. I know some people can't stand what's his name? Elf.
Oh, Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah,
some
I
people
know.
are like, enough Will Ferrell movies, and I'm like, I can't get enough. So it's like it's very subjective. And that's okay. There's no right or wrong, as long as it's not, like you said, offensive. But and even with Monty Python, I feel like growing up, my dad thought Monty Python was so funny, my mom hated it, and he would say stuff like, yeah, women don't get it or something, and I was like,
Oh,
well, I mean, I'm a woman and I think it's funny. I think she just doesn't like it, dad. But
oh,
like, but
I
like,
I
it's
hope we're
subjective. It's like you said.
I hope we're moving away from that mentality. I don't know if we are, but I feel like because men grew up knowing a lot of women that weren't into the things they were into, like they
Yeah.
need to quit making statements like that because there are a lot of women out there that like the things you like, like
Right, and maybe some of the comedy was, like, making fun of women, and that's why they didn't like it, not in this case, but, like, that could have been part of it. Also, there weren't as many female comedians as there are now. There were some, but they were kind of actively it was kind of a guys' club,
oh
comedy.
yeah.
So it was harder for women to get in, and there was the whole, like, women aren't funny joke, stuff like that. But I think we've moved past that for sure. I mean, I hope. I
I
mean, I like a lot of comedians that are men and women, so
Exactly. Like I love Mindy Kaling. I think she's one of the most talented and funniest people on the planet. Like I think she's one of the best comedy writers out there. Put her up against any of her male counterpoints that are uh, you know, Adam McKay, any of those people. And Interesting that you bring up Kevin Smith, because I think when I was very much younger, I was so in the pocket of that just because I felt like, oh, he's a nerd and da 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 da.
Oh, it
But
was huge. I was like, even back then, I was like the only kid my age that was like, no, I don't know.
but
And
and
it's
I
like, again, even saying that out loud now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel
but
like I'm like the age where I should have loved it, and like a lot of my close friends love it, but I just didn't like. I don't know.
but I watched his most recent one that he did, and I'm like, have I outgrown Kevin Smith? Like, as my and like he even says he's not really a director, right? Like he teases himself and says he just got lucky. I think he might be a talented writer when it comes from a place of personal
Well, I
experiences
think he
for.
told a very specific point of view from a very specific time, like, and he was
Yeah.
like the main voice to do that,
eh,
and the only person doing that that was really successful. So I get it.
Yeah. And it's fine to not like something, and you don't have to trash it, cuz I think I don't know if that comes with age. I know, like, in my younger self, if I was really disappointed in something, I would want to eviscerate it and be like, "How could you like that?"
You
But
say it
now
comes with age. I would say for some,
I would
because we've
say
seen on Twitter and other
it's
places,
true.
some
But
people love to bash.
like, I saw the most recent Ghostbusters movie with a friend of mine who loves almost anything Ghostbusters, and I just wasn't that hot for it. But I wasn't mad that he liked it. I was like, I'm
You
glad you
didn't go
liked it.
home and write like a scathing review that
No,
and
I was
tag him
like,
in it.
I'm happy you enjoyed it. I'm glad you liked it. Just wasn't for me, but
Yeah,
I'm not gonna rain on your parade, because
yeah, that's nice. That's kind of you.
there's probably something I love that you think is terrible. So
Well, back to, like, funny scenes from the movie, the other funny gag I thought was when Brian is writing, on the wall with paint or blood. That was a good one.
I wonder how many teachers and professors love that scene,
I thought the same thing. He's like, "No, okay, try it again." And then
I
they
feel
make him do it all night, and then they're like, "Now never do that again." And then someone else arrests him. It was just that I thought that was great.
as I feel like I've had this discussion with a professor or someone editing a paper or something I've written, like, okay, and now where should this be?
Sound it out
Yeah.
phonetically. Yeah. It was so good. I was like, this is great." It was probably one of my favorite scenes for sure.
And I think, of course, we've got to go with, like, I mean, one of the best songs ever put to a film, so much so that they included it in the musical version about the other movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Always Look on the Bright Side of Life is like the curtain call of Spamalot.
I've never seen Spamalot.
It's okay. I'm gonna probably say something controversial here to a lot of
Uh-oh. Hot take Sunday. Hot
musical
take
theater
Easter
fans.
Sunday.
I really do not like this trend that musical theater was on, where they're taking, because of course, forever we adapted Broadway musicals and made them movies, right?
Yeah. You don't
I
like the
really
reverse.
do not like a lot of the trend that happened in the 2000s and teens, where they were taking movies and adapting them into musicals. Some of them work, but like a lot of them, I'm like, I'd rather just watch the movie. Like, you didn't have to turn this into a musical. Like, I so it's Spamalot's fine, but like I'd rather just go home and watch The Holy Grail. Like,
Okay. I was curious to your thoughts
but
because
that
I think I've seen it advertised and I'm like, I don't know, but a lot of people like it, and maybe they're just. I mean, we reached a point where it's like people are sort of desperate for more Holy Grail content, and that's why. But I don't know.
But I mean, I feel the same way about the producers and Hairspray. Like, I prefer the original source, like, instead of the musical version. Which, I mean, the original Hairspray kind of already was a musical, but not as much, I guess. I don't know, but like, it's just a trend. I also don't like jukebox musicals, where like they just
Mm,
take somebody's music and try to create a Broadway show out of it, but it's really just like a cover band.
yeah. What I'm thinking of, the one that I saw, one of the only musicals I've seen live, the one about the Four Seasons,
Oh, Jersey Boys. Oh
Jersey
god.
Boys.
That's
Yeah,
like probably in my opinion
I
one of the
liked
worst.
it, but it
Okay,
always
I'm
makes me
sorry.
think of the other guys. I loved it. You undersold it. The pageantry, the costumes. Wow, what a musical.
But that's me, and I'm not
Yeah,
here to
no, that's
shame
fine.
anyone who enjoys those, but like it's just a trend I
There's no
wasn't.
shortage of them for sure, but yeah, I feel like they're still a pretty big thing,
Yeah,
but I
it's
know
just
what you mean. I get it.
it's not particularly a trend I like. I'm like, can you just write original musicals?
Oh gosh. Hamilton, I feel like was the last big
I
original
mean, but
musical.
what a one though, right?
Yeah,
But
that was
I
good.
I love that song though. It's hilarious
It is hilarious. It's catchy.
and it's poignant.
Like I forget it's from this movie.
It's poignant too. Like I honestly, I would be perfectly fine if someone played this at my funeral. Like yeah,
Right?
look
Yeah.
on the bright side of life. Like yeah, life can suck and be terrible, but you can't don't be miserable the whole time. Have a laugh. I think that's ultimately what Mighty Python is saying is have a laugh
I agree.
at this ridiculous things people do.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, from the religious fervor in the movie to the political movements to just everything. It's just sort of having a laugh at all that and just not taking things so seriously. I agree.
Yeah, and I think that's why they resonate, not only because of that and because of the influence. Like I said, I don't think Saturday Night Live exists without Flying Circus. And another thing that's like my happy place, the Muppets. I don't think the Muppet Show exists without Flying Circus. I feel like
Yeah, you'd have to think they, at the very least, were an influence for sure.
so yeah, always look on the bright side of life and the Rainbow Connection. Yeah, I want those played at my party.
I totally get that. Well, I guess, were there any other scenes that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to talk about?
I mean, I think we covered like the good ones. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a skit or a gag. Someone's like, "Oh, I can't believe you didn't bring that one up. That one was hilarious." I mean, it's Mighty Python. They're
It's
almost
nothing but hilarious scenes. Yeah.
they're almost batting at 100 even in this one. And even though I personally prefer Holy Grail just because it's more quotable, probably because I like obsessively watched it for like in my
Same.
high
When I
school
was a
days, like
kid.
all the time.
Yeah.
But
That was one of those movies that I grew up and realized other people did that. Like, I thought that was just a me thing and something was wrong with me for watching it so many times, and then when I found out that, like, okay, everybody thinks this is funny, I was like, "Oh, thank God. I'm not alone."
I think this one is definitely a landmark film for them, and I know
Mhm.
that I think in the UK this one is a little more favorable than it is here in the US with audiences.
Yeah, I think they're less extreme about, like, the nudity is, like, a big thing, I feel like, not to me personally, but in America.
We are very prudish when it comes to nudity, and I'm not
Yeah.
proclaiming that every movie needs nudity in it, but I mean,
Oh,
like
so on Easter Sunday, you're telling everyone you want more nudity? Wow. Just kidding.
so
No, but yeah, I
controversial.
agree where it's like, this is not a big deal in Europe, but it's such a big deal here. Like, for
It
some reason, it's
it's
just so
such a big
so
deal that
controversial.
the recent Ben Affleck movie that's not even that good, people are like just so happy that that type of movie exists again because we are so prudish with
Mhm.
sexuality and nudity in America, but like we don't care if people's arms and legs and heads are decapitated with blood flowing. That's fine.
That's fine. Yeah, that's an interesting thing about American culture. But yeah, I guess that brings me then to my last couple of questions for you. Like, why do you like this movie so much? I know you said you don't watch it as much as Monty Python, but what kind of keeps you coming back? Maybe to Monty Python as a whole.
Well, like I said, Monty Python is like my happy place. Like it just puts a smile on my face. It makes me feel better. And I feel like all three of these movies have some kind of value. They're well made. I think Meaning of Life is probably the weakest just because it's just a series of sketches. And I feel like this one is a really well-made movie, and I think, like, the important message, as I said, is, like, yeah, just remember to kind of smile and remember that life is ridiculous. It's okay to laugh at it. I mean, even as they say, like, God has to have a sense of humor with the stuff that happens in society, like,
Right.
and
Very true.
and I think it's pointing out the ridiculousness that we as humans and as mankind, like the rules and the regulations and everything that gets put on with whether it be organized religion or government or even rebellions, like people get so worked up over things that don't really matter at the end of the day. Like,
Yeah, that are arbitrary or specific to that time, and outside of it, you're like, "Why is that a big deal?" Yeah. 100%. And so if you're trying to introduce someone who's never seen Monty Python before, like, how would you pitch this?
oh, well, first I would say probably I would show them the Holy Grail before showing them
Yeah,
this. Like
I would too.
this is like extra credit homework, right? Did you like Holy
Yeah.
Grail? Then that's not going to guarantee you're going to like this because you liked Holy Grail, but and maybe show them some of the sketches from the sketch show too. And like if you're into
Yes.
that, then here,
I
let me
liked
give.
the bicycle repairman, the cheese shop.
I
There's quite a
mean
few that I thought were funny.
the lumberjack song. I mean, come on,
Yes.
that's like there's so much gold. The parrot scene.
Yes.
No,
I
count
like
it.
what you said about extra credit. I think that's like the perfect way to describe it.
This is extra credit. I mean, if you like Holy Grail, you've seen some of the like. I think there's a film that's like a compilation of a lot of their sketches. I think it's called "And Now for Something Completely Different"
Yes, I watched that before.
because I
Yep.
believe there's a gag where John Cleese is a drill instructor and he like they end up shooting someone with a banana or something. But I mean, yeah, if you can get into that, then I would say, hey, check this movie out. It's a movie where this guy gets confused to be the Messiah because he's kind of around the same age as Jesus and living in the same time period and place as Jesus and kind of all the mishaps that are going on in that society.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's
And
pretty accurate.
if you can vibe with that and not be offended, great. But
Great.
if you know, because I just had a conversation with someone and they were like, well, every movie is worth one watch. And I was like, well, of course, if you want an opinion on something, you need to watch it and you should give
Mhm.
everything at least one chance. I said, but that doesn't mean I'm going to recommend a movie to anyone. Like, there are people I know I would not recommend this movie to because I
Same.
know
Yeah.
they're not going to like it and they're not
Yeah,
movie
they're not gonna
people.
think it's funny, they're gonna be offended, it's like, why force them to sit through something I know they're not gonna enjoy?
Because I was like, there's a difference between people who are like really into film and movies and they'll probably give almost anything a chance. And then like there's your aunt.
Yeah.
Your aunt, you know what they like, what they don't like. And so when you see a movie, you know kind of the people who you think will like this and who won't. So when you see a movie that almost any movie you see, you think of someone and you're like, oh, they would like that. But if someone came up to you and was like, Lisa, should I watch Life of Brian? If you know, like, they're either really deeply religious and easily offended, you're probably gonna be like, then not for you. You're not gonna like this, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you gotta know your audience. But Cody, thank you so much for coming on today and for talking about this movie with me. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at FilmNerd85. You can also find my show. It's usually live because I'm a terrible editor, so it's just live show. So
That's brave though. See, I don't do live because I'm
loves and
scared.
all. We have a YouTube page. We have Facebook page. We have a Twitter page, but it's usually I'm posting the videos and tagging the page on my own Twitter site because for whatever reason on my computer, it only lets me use the page on my phone. So yeah, Video Store Rejects. We're on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Like I said, we're covering the films of Ridley Scott and the Coen brothers for the majority of the year. And then we usually do a Sunday brunch show. We're finishing up the James Bond movies. So I think my co host Chris and his wife Lindsay will be covering all the 80s films sometime this week. I may or may not be on that show because of change of schedule. But yeah, that's where you can find
Awesome.
me.
Great. Well, yeah, and highly recommend your show. I've been on it before. Would love to come back. And thank you for coming on and hope to have you back soon.